Hey folks, welcome to Effective Remote Work's live stream today. My name is Justin. If you haven't tuned in before or you're familiar with the channel, this is Effective Remote Work. We're here to talk about work and being effective at it, potentially in a remote environment. But something kind of triggered me today that I want to talk about, and it's the topic of burnout. Now, if you haven't hung out with us before, be sure to let us know in the chat where you're from. But more importantly, let me know what your comments and thoughts are on burnout as we're discussing this issue. There's a link in the description of this video where you can head on over to our community at community.effectiveremotework.com to discuss it there too, if you're watching this after the fact. Now, there's a tweet that I came across today that was really sparked me to try to consolidate some of my thoughts together on this subject. It's something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and especially in the last few weeks, because I know I myself have been struggling with just feeling exhausted, and I know many people that I work with and other places are kind of just running into a wall right now. And so let's talk a little bit about this tweet that I ran across, so you can kind of get a sense of where I'm coming from with this, and we'll get into what I'm thinking about burnout and the broader implication of productivity, remote work, work culture, and the like. So on the screen here, I've got a tweet. This dude, Tim Myers, looks like this tweet has gone pretty viral. I discovered this on Hacker News today. But he's basically telling his story about burnout and how he's leaving his job, that he just can't continue doing it anymore, and he's leaving the tech industry. And he goes on to talk about how he's discovered detailing cars, and it's kind of a meditative thing for him, and he started a business doing that, which I think is awesome. So to kind of preface this conversation today, this isn't about Tim. This isn't a reaction to Tim. This isn't a response to him. I'm actually really happy that this dude, even though I have no idea who he is, I'm really, really happy that he has taken action to try to handle this situation, because burnout is a real thing that people deal with. I've run into situations in my life where I've gotten close to burnout, and it's not a fun thing. Burnout, I'm not going to get into the definition of it here on this stream today, largely because there are lots of other resources out there that can tell you what burnout is in a better fashion than I can. I know there's one on the screen here. I'll just pull it up real quick while we're on the stream. Somebody had responded to that thread of signs of burnout. Just a second while I pull it up here. All right, so here we go. So signs of burnout: dread, irritation, fatigue, distraction, isolation, apathy, and detachment. We can all feel these things at times throughout our work, but when these things become a consistent pattern, you might be dealing with burnout, and it's something to seek help with, whether it's from a medical professional or a counselor, therapist, of something of that sort, changing what you're doing on a daily basis, maybe even potentially changing your work that you're doing, just like the guy who posted the tweet. When you get to that point, you've got to do something about it. But what I wanted to talk about today is that we don't have to get there. And I think there's just kind of this expectation or this reality in our work culture today that leads people to burnout. And the reason I think that is just that we love working. In the West, we, especially in America, where I am from, this might be different in other parts of the world, but we love to work. And I think there's this rooted place there. We love the idea of achievement and finding success. And we oftentimes elevate that above all other things in our lives. And that's not a healthy thing, because when we elevate health or when we elevate success above all other things, where we want to drive to that end goal. And this might not necessarily be, I'm going to start up a unicorn company in Silicon Valley and sell it for $1 billion. That's not what I necessarily am looking at, but it can be as As simple as I really want to chase that one promotion. And so I'm going to put in some extra time at the office to just show how forthright I am, how dedicated I am to this company and this team so that maybe I'll get picked for that next level up. That's not a bad thing to want to pursue a promotion. But again, it all comes down to where we're maybe overextending our bounds with work. I have been thinking a lot on this subject in the last couple of years, and it's largely more broad, than just like burnout. I've been thinking about productivity in general and how it's really like a healthy approach to productivity is like life management oriented. It's holistic. It's not just this like, let's figure out all these life hacks and pick the right tools and get the right checklists in order so that we can be the most successful that we can be, so that we can be the next Tim Ferriss and work a 4-hour work week. Life doesn't really work like that. It's not realistic to expect that if we just get all the right little tactical pieces in order, then we've got it all figured out. We have relationships, we have our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health, our spiritual health. We have our marriage if we're married, and family if we have kids. We have hobbies. We have other things that can bring this sense of satisfaction to us. But when we're locked in and glued in for 8 or more hours a day to our work, one thing that I found for myself is that sometimes I have so much energy on the table in the day. Okay, I've got this finite amount of energy and attention that I have. And when I walk away from the computer at the end of the day, there's a lot of times that there's only just scraps of that energy left. And then I'm going downstairs to my family to spend time with my wife and my kids, and I have some issues being present there. I think there's some challenges, and I think there's some culture that we're dealing with in regards to this problem of burnout. So there's this like internal culture thing where we've kind of got to sort out what our own personal balance is. We've got to find a rhythm of healthy work and healthy rest. I like to call it this work-rest cycle. This is an idea that I was introduced to first in the book Time Off by Max Frenzel and John Fitch. Talked about that a few different times on the YouTube channel and on the podcast.effectiveremotework.com. And I think it's been kind of transformational for me to think about it. But there's even something deeper with it too. And it's a lot of times the expectation that we put on ourselves and companies put on us in knowledge work. Knowledge work isn't going to go away. The tech industry is all knowledge work, but there's a ton of other industries that are heavily dependent upon thinking and producing ideas or processing ideas as a result of the work. And the reason I think that there's a problem here is because we don't do well with deeply focusing on something for 8 hours a day, or getting sucked into meetings for 8 hours a day where we have to pay attention and we have to be engaged. Otherwise, there's this social pressure that comes that causes us to dig in more than we maybe need to in a given moment, or we're pulled into meetings where it's just another distraction from us getting the work done that we need to get done, or we're having to deal with a boatload of email. There's information overload that's going on. There's a few different cultural problems inside of knowledge work that cause these issues for burnout as well. So the first one being deep work. Cal Newport in his book, Deep Work, he really talks about deep work in the sense that it's a finite thing that we can do. There's a cap on the amount of deep work that you can actually get done in a given day. It's a muscle that you can build, but even the best, most skilled people at doing deep work can really only muster up an average of about 4 hours of deep work in a day. And a little story from my own life, though, in the last few weeks is that I've been trying to schedule in, as I've been experimenting with time blocking again and the like. I have been trying to schedule in, I guess, and I didn't really realize I was doing this because it was split out throughout my day, but I was trying to do deep work 4, 6, maybe even 7 hours in a day, and limiting my unfocused time or time that's more shallow work to maybe an hour or so. This had good results to start off with, but I've realized that level of deep work is really only sustainable for a short period of time. And now, in the last couple of weeks, I know I have been paying for that with lower energy levels and just feeling completely exhausted. I kind of wonder if we're putting pressure on ourselves in knowledge work and especially in the tech world because there's so much investment and desire to ship stuff. And sometimes we just get passionate about things and we dig into things, but we don't necessarily think about the energy ramifications of that in the long term either. So we have this issue with overworking in a deep work sense. We can even be limiting ourselves to 8 hours a day because that's about what I do. But we can be overworking ourselves in the amount of focused work that we're doing, which is draining us from our energy reserves. And again, what I mentioned earlier, the other problem with a lot of the knowledge work stuff is that there's too much activity going on and there's not a lot of calm. There's not a lot of focus that's involved. We get pulled into stuff all the time. We have to deal with a bunch of emails. This is where some productivity hacks and stuff can come into play. And I know Cal Newport's new book, A World Without Email, kind of addresses this problem head on in regard to process. Definitely recommend checking that one out if you haven't. But I guess what I wanted to say today in this live stream is that I'm kind of tired of seeing people be posting out there and saying, man, I'm so burnt out. I just got to get out of this industry. I've got to get out of this job. I'm getting out of my job. We don't have to get to burnout before we make a change, for one. And two, there are so many cultural things that we can be dealing with in our work culture and be advocating for, I think, that would help change the environment so that we're not so prone to this type of issue, this burnout. I've been doing a lot of thinking too around effective remote work lately, and I've been realizing that one of the things that I have been passionate about and that I want to see happen as a result of the existence of this thing, effective remote work, is to help you live a healthy and productive life. You know, we talk about remote work a lot around here, but when I get down to the core concept of remote work and the thing that I think is the most powerful about it is that the companies that are executing remote work well, they're the ones who are empowering their employees with flexibility. They're the ones empowering their employees with the ability to take on a sane workload, with not overworking, with balancing their life with work, where work becomes a part of their life instead of being the sole focus of it, where work is like this one big area in life, and then everything else just kind of has to fit around it. A lot of successful remote work companies are allowing their employees to structure their lives in a way where work just becomes a part of the whole picture, and you can start to kind of develop some balance in that. So I think there's an element of where we've experienced remote work. A lot of us have in the last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's not remote work. Moving all your operations onto a computer and being on Zoom calls all day is not what I would call remote work. It is remote, but in my mind, when I think of remote work, I think of companies who empower asynchronous communication. They give their employees flexibility as far as their schedules go, and they're more people-focused. They're not trying to get people plugged in for 8 hours a day, but they recognize that people have families, people have needs, people have a desire to get connected in their local communities. There are some healthy things that can come out of this if we just would embrace it. And I think instead of pushing back against change that's occurring in the workplace, it'd be great if we could figure out a way to embrace it. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to look like everybody needs to become a fully async remote organization, but there are some things that we can learn from companies that are executing well. And it's largely about empowering people to live healthy and productive lives. Because let's face it, companies are communities too. And the way it used to be in the world, at least I guess in my mind, maybe I'm just a hyper idealist, but maybe it wasn't quite always like this. But in my mind, people took care of each other a little bit more before. And now it seems like people are so isolated. and very focused on themselves and only their small little units of influence. But when we come into a company, we're a group of people that's existing in the same place or moving toward an ideal together. It's the same thing as if you live in a community, a city, or a small town. You might not know everybody there, and you might not explicitly take care of everyone, but you're invested in that place. You've chosen to live there. And a company is very much the same. The thing is, the company needs to be then focused too on treating it like a community, where we're taking care of people, not just solely focused on making money. Anyway, that's a little bit of a rant of mine. I do think that companies are communities too, and we should totally focus on investing in companies and in people through companies. But my point today is that you don't have to go to the level of burnout before you make a change in your life. There are things you can do, there are things you can advocate for. Number one, by setting limits on your schedules, by building quality leisure, but also I think the other thing that I'm thinking about lately too is like limiting your deep work. You might really only have 3 hours in a day that you can effectively do some deep work where you're just seriously locked in and focused on something. And then at the end of that time, you're done. You might have some other administrative style stuff to do in the long term, but emails and chats and things of that sort. But when it comes down to it, there's a balance to be found there. And I have no idea what this looks like holistically, but I do know that I'm interested in pursuing it. Now, I know we have a couple posts in the chat here I wanted to just take a brief look at. Mark says, do the opposite of burnout. Water in, stay hydrated. Yes, very important. I mean, even the basic physical needs of hydrating yourself, that's a really good idea. But then even just the kind of the metaphorical picture of that too is to take care of yourself. That's super important. Univeral, sorry if I got your name wrong there. Companies do not take care of anyone. They only force-fed employees with cakes and candies and ruining their health. Well, yeah, I mean, I think there hasn't necessarily been a cultural incentive for that because there's been a lot of companies, or kind of our work culture, especially in the West, has been focused on I own your time. When you come to a company, like I basically own you for 8 hours a day. And there's been some pushback against that mentality in recent years. And I think async remote work companies are kind of leading some of that charge, but there's other companies that are kind of behind that as well, that are starting to think about companies as groups of people that need to be taken care of and nurtured. Simon Sinek is one who I often like what he has to say in this area. But it's really all about empathy. It's really all about taking care of people, because when you take care of people, they take care of other people. When you have a base set of needs met in someone's life and they don't feel like they have to just scrounge around for either money or food or work to do or things like that, when they don't feel like their job is threatened because they're maybe not 100% productive, they're free to actually do their jobs better. I remember back when I worked in IT, I was in IT support and I did a little bit of management as well. And one of the things that was strong in our company culture there, even though it was very much a 8 to 5 type organization, but it was make sure people are taken care of as much as possible because they take care of our customers. And that's true. I think there's just some ways that we can amp that up a little bit instead of saying, hey, you belong at a desk because you committed to work here. There's some places and times where that's necessary to have a mentality of that because you're directly exchanging dollars for hours. But in some jobs, especially, it's not the mode of thinking that works best. And I tend to lean towards more knowledge work being in that place where it's just not sustainable for people to have a super high level of productivity. And that's also another knock on, in my mind, of the productivity space at this point in time. I know not everybody would necessarily say that that's important, but there is definitely this mentality in productivity that I have wrestled with. Maybe it's just my perception of it, so I could be completely wrong in perceiving this, but it's entirely and totally possible that I don't know. I might be right, but I might not. So just take this with a grain of salt. This is my perspective. But that in the productivity world, that we have to eke out every ounce of productivity from every minute of our day. And I've tried that, and it's exhausting, for one. And for two, I just don't think it's realistic for most people. Again, that's coming back to the concept of like a work rest cycle. I really think that it's important for us to work hard and be focused and be intentional in what we do. But then also we have to rest. We have to take the pressure off. The book Time Off puts it as like an inhale. We're working, it's like our inhale, and then exhaling is like our rest. We need both, but we often overemphasize the working part and heavily underemphasize the resting part. And resting doesn't have to look like just sitting down in front of Netflix. In fact, I think a lot of times we end up sitting in front of Netflix or playing video games or things like that because just getting sucked into social media. One, because a lot of those things are designed to suck us in, but two, because at the end of the day, we have nothing left. We don't have any energy to invest in a hobby. We don't have any energy to say, you know what, I'm going to go do something fun with my friends tonight. Though a lot of times we'll do that. But I think there's a lot of times where we're just so worn out from work that we don't take care of other areas of our lives that are important because we've overemphasized, again, this whole concept of work and achievement and pushing forward and achieving our goals or making more money or whatever it is. So to kind of round all of this out today is, I just wanted to put it out there, is that I'm interested in going on this journey. I don't know exactly what this means for effective remote work. I know that we'll be talking about this over the next coming months, kind of exploring these different topic areas, but especially if you haven't followed along with us before, there are a few ways to get connected. But the main one I wanted to highlight today is our community. Again, in the description of this video, there is a link to the community topic discussing this very video. If you're interested in continuing this conversation, head on over there, sign up for an account. It's completely free. And I want to have you involved in this conversation in the future as we go forward. I'll give a couple more seconds for questions on the stream here today. I'm going to wrap it up in just a couple of minutes. But I appreciate everybody who's hopped on today. And if you're catching this again after the fact, I appreciate it. You can leave any comments that you have in the comments below the video, or especially head on over to the community at community.effectiveremotework.com. Well, that wraps up this live stream for today. Again, thank you so much for stopping along with us. This is, I think, an important topic to cover over the course of the next few years. I believe that there are some changes coming for work. And I think if we can lean into that and work together, not necessarily to change corporate culture, but to change our expectations of work, our individual expectations, so that we can kind of line things up a little bit better so that work doesn't take up all this space and energy in our lives. And so that we have space to kind of balance things out. People would call this work-life integration. I'm just more of a fan of the idea of having a balanced life. Because again, my idea and my desire here is to help you live a healthy and productive life. And we have to have both of those aspects. Univ is saying, I just left an IT job working from home where the manager chased me 24/7 for meetings, and it was so intense and no important work was done but long meetings. Yeah, and I honestly think that you're not alone in that. You're not alone in that experience. There's a lot of people who experience work that way, where you have to fight to get an amount of time. I know managers in the company that I used to work at, they would have meetings booked up from 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 p.m. at night. And they would get, probably 300 emails in a day that they would have to deal with. So then what would they do? They would go home and they'd have to handle their email. They'd have to handle most of their administrative work. And again, that's not sustainable. It's part of the reason why I chose not to continue down that path, because I didn't want to have to do that stuff. And I think there are healthy choices that we can make for ourselves. There's boundaries that we can set. So good for you for leaving that job, and I hope you found something that's better and working for you, Univ. I think that's a really good thing to recognize, that it's difficult in those places, and but there is change that can happen, and it's just a matter of, we have to train up better leaders. We have to train up people who are more empathetic, but that also starts with us learning to be more empathetic with ourselves, learning healthy boundaries with our work and with other people. Let's be honest. If we have too much work on our plate, we can't just take more on because the boss said we had to. We can push back, and sometimes that might mean in a company culture that we don't get something down the road. But if it's for our own sanity and our health, I would much rather invest in the long term than a short term gain. Because if you make a short term gain and then it costs you your health 5 or 10 years down the road, it's not really a good turnout. But it's really hard to think that way sometimes too in the moment, especially when we're feeling social pressure or pressure from upper management or pressure from leaders in our lives to continue down that path. So I'm going to leave this live stream there. Again, thank you everyone for joining. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, be sure to do so while you're here. And again, sign up for a free account over at our community at community.effectiveremotework.com. Again, my name is Justin with Effective Remote Work. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you the next time we're live.